Hey friends! Welcome to Spirit Club, a podcast and community that is all about doing the inner work to live an aligned and, dare I say, happy life. I'm your host, spiritual guide and intuitive, Angell Kelly, and I'm here to share my teachings along with messages passed on to me from higher consciousness. I've also got incredible guests in store to help you go down all those spiritual rabbit holes. So let's go! Welcome to the club! Hi everyone! Welcome back to Spirit Club and another guest episode. With Halloween on the menu this week, I thought it'd be fun to talk about the roots of this, we'll call it celebration, and also known as Samhain, but we'll get into that. And while we're talking Halloween and all things Halloween, I thought we may as well dive into the topic of witches because, you know, I think witches are pretty misunderstood. So I'm really happy to have found today's guest, Eileen March. She's really leaned into her witchiness and transformed both her lives and the lives of others. She is an intuitive coach, a wild medicine energy healer, a podcast host herself, and a slow living witch. Welcome, Eileen.
Thank you, Angel. Thank you for having me here. It's such a pleasure.
It's so great to have met you. And just background for everyone, Eileen and I, we've never met, but we happen to live in the same city. And, you know, that's just kind of rare to have found someone in your city that's in alignment. So I feel pretty lucky.
Yeah, it's like the magic of, as much as I often rail against social media and Instagram particularly, it's also magical in the way that it can bring us together and in situations we otherwise probably never would have met.
Yes, you're right. Totally. And really, I found you through you being on another podcast. And in said podcast, I think you had mentioned Canada, and I was like, Canada? Where? We're in Canada. Say more.
Oh, nice. Was it the Spiritual Sisters podcast?
Yes.
Spiritual Sisters. Nice. Yeah. Amazing. It becomes a small world.
It does. And I love it. Okay, so let's start with a couple getting to know you icebreaker questions.
Sure.
So first question, I'm sure you've answered a million times, is what are your big three in astrology?
Oh, yes. I am an Aquarius, Sun, Moon, and a Leo rising.
Sun and Moon Aquarius.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So off the beaten path you go.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it was so funny when I learned more about astrology as I came into this kind of side of the world. I remember reading how Aquarians they're recluses, they don't like the limelight, like and I was like, that is not like, please put a spotlight on me. And then I found out about my rising sign.
You're right.
Like, okay. I am dichotomous because Aquarius and Leo are opposite signs in the
right, aren't
in
they?
astrology.
Like, yeah, you go
they
down Aquarius, you come out Leo. Yeah.
So everything made
okay.
sense. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and Aquarius, Sun, and Moon. So that must have felt like very, I don't know, did you feel like a black sheep growing up?
I did. I think I embraced it. I don't know. Maybe it's the Leo piece of me that was like, whatever, I'm going to shine my weird a little bit. Not always. There were certainly times where I really wished I could fit in, but I've definitely never felt like I fit in. My partner now is even like, I'll be like, well, that's not how I am. He's like, you don't count. You're different than everyone else. And like all of the things that he's like, this is just normal. I'm like, that's not how I feel. Like, you're not a good example of how everyone else feels, Eileen.
You are the exception to the rule. That's what you are.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah.
Great. Okay. That help. I feel like I know you so much better already. Next question is, what is your morning routine, if you have one?
Yeah, I love this question because it's part of my practice and part of the work that I do with clients is creating really intentional mornings. And I'm like, nobody's perfect. I need mine to be flexible because some mornings I have to get up and start doing relatively quickly. But in an ideal world, my morning routine always includes getting up, trying really hard to stay off my phone until I have come downstairs, I put on my coffee, I take a moment to smell the beans and be appreciative of how far those beans had to travel to get to me. And then, weather permitting, I step outside, and if very weather permitting, barefoot, and stand in the grass and say my morning gratitudes and prayers and call in my guides and ask for any support I need and ask how I can be of service and set intentions for the day. And that's the one piece that, no matter how busy I am, where I have to go, how quickly I have to get out of the house, that piece stays present. So that's like my anchor. On the days where I have time, I then sit down and read or journal. And like ideally, I have a 2-hour start to my day where I can just take it really slow and eat and savor my coffee and read a good book. Usually I read things to learn in the mornings, and then before bed I read a novel.
Yeah. Ooh. And what are we reading to learn right now?
Currently, When God Was a Woman.
Oh, never even heard of this one.
It's quite dense. It's like a archaeological, scholarly type book, but it looks at the goddess cultures of the ancient Near East, and how it's very fascinating the way that, like, I knew that goddess culture preceded monotheism and Christianity, Judeo-Christian kind of beliefs. It's really interesting how we often hear of those, like the goddess cults and all of those pieces. They were not cults. They were full-blown, very in-depth, elaborate religions that centered on the goddess. And yeah, just this one author gathered so much information and intel from all across the Mediterranean area and the Middle East to kind of paint this picture of how things might have been, and quite different than the single reality we know today.
Oh, wow. What a timely time to be reading that, because it just, obviously I think we're all feeling the rise of the feminine. And so there's, a time that we need to go remember.
Yeah. Yeah,
Amazing.
exactly.
Okay, thanks for sharing. Okay, next question is, we're all about doing the inner work, spiritual growth here on this podcast. So we'd love to know any teachers, mentors, coaches, whatever, that come to mind that had a dramatic impact on your personal development.
And the first person that comes to mind is the woman that I trained with for my energy healers training. She's also in Calgary. She's also a retired midwife, and her name's Nadine Robinson.
Okay, Nadine Robinson.
Yeah, she's wild and wonderful, and I'm really grateful that I knew her prior to me leaving, like even knowing about what the heck she was up to. But she's a big one for sure. Maybe it's not obvious, but I draw inspiration from Rebecca Campbell. She's like in the bigger sphere, definitely one of those that I look to. But a few others that I really appreciate, especially in the world of entrepreneurship and spirituality, are Simone Soul. And she used to be a business coach, but she's got her woo elements as well, and just really lovely ethics. And Melissa Tiers, who does hypnosis trainings.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah. And I'm blanking on the one other's name. I'm trying to look for her book behind me, but it'll come to me. I got all sorts.
Yeah, I mean, we all have like big lists, so I feel like it's nice to just, the ones that first come are the ones that people needed to hear about. So great. And how beautiful to be able to have like an in-person mentor. Like, I feel like these days, it's just harder to find such a thing,
Yeah, I was very grateful. The beginning of my training happened online because it was COVID. It was early days of COVID when I trained. But by the end of, or the second, I think we met 4 times in person over the course of that year, and then multiple gatherings with the different cohorts of the healers. And we still get to gather in person, which is lovely.
So lovely. Okay, beautiful. Okay, so let's do a little magic here and speak out what it is that you're currently trying to let go of.
How many things? So many things. This is the perfect time of year for letting go. One of the things I'm trying to let go of, and I don't know that it's ever gone, but I'm continually working with, perhaps moving with rather than fighting against, is fear. Always. That's a big one that comes up over and over, but also that like need to control the outcome. So really, letting go of that clinging need for control.
Okay. I think many of us can relate.
Yeah. High achieving type A woman in Western society.
Oh, yeah.
You want to control
Needing
things?
to control? Wanting a certain outcome? Okay, so we're letting go of that. And what would you like to call in?
I think calling in more ease and flow and the trust to allow for that space to happen.
I mean, those two go very hand in hand. Yeah.
Yeah, they sure do.
Okay, great, Eileen. Thank you for playing the game, answering the questions. So now I would love to just get into your story. So, from what I know about you so far, you are a modern day witch, which many of us are, but we just don't really know it. And so I would love to just start with your story of how you came to get into this work, how you came to call yourself a witch. Yeah, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I would love to share. I think I mentioned before we hopped on, or maybe it was, I've done a couple podcasts today. Yeah. I'm trying to remember who I said what to, but I grew up as an atheist, or at the most an agnostic. I grew up without any kind of religion or spirituality. I was always kind of intrigued by astrology, but really was in an atmosphere where it was like, nah, whatever, it's kind of fun to read, but it's not real. And felt like it would be nice to believe in something more, but not sure that I ever really did. And I was working as a midwife, so that's my previous career, is as a midwife here in Calgary, which was beautiful and rewarding and absolutely overwhelmingly exhausting so often. And I was already in a place where I knew that midwifery was not going to be for me forever because of the toll that it takes physically and emotionally. But I was doing okay, and then COVID hit. And COVID really took away a lot of the things that I used to refuel, to fill myself up, to keep myself able to continue to be in that role, travel and time out with like friends, going out for breakfast after an all-night birth with the other midwives, hugging my clients. Like there was all of these things that made the work manageable that just suddenly got taken away. And I was living alone at the time, and so I started to just look for something. I felt like maybe I need to learn something else, maybe I need to go back to school. I don't know what I need, I just know that I need something. And kind of two things happened very close in time. I'm not sure which happened first. One was that a friend was writing these really beautiful blog posts about everything she was learning about herself and mindfulness and all of these like neuroscientific principles as she went through this course that she was in. I had no idea what the course was. And another fellow midwife had asked me if I knew what Nadine was up to. That's my mentor. And I was like, not really, but we're, sitting, Hannah and I, sitting in the cafeteria crying. And she's like, I think, like, I'm seeing Nadine and it's so helpful. I think maybe you should see her too. And so nearing the same time, I applied for this course that my friend was in. Turns out it was a life coaching certification course. I had never heard I'd never even heard of a life coach. I was like, what is this life coach thing? Yeah, never heard of them. which is interesting. And I like did a Google and I'm like, well, that's kind of clickbaity. I think I got some fairly Tony Robbins-esque hits and was like, I don't know that that's for me. However, I trusted my friend and I could clearly see that what she was learning was great for her own personal development. So I applied for that really just for myself. I was like, this feels like self-help with accountability. And I started to see Nadine, and she was in the process of launching the next year of wild medicine healers training. And I signed up for that feeling like, I don't know what this is. I don't know that I believe in it. I just really want to learn from this woman and be near her. Mm-hmm. And so fast forward through these courses, partway through the year where I was immersed in both of these courses, I realized that I could actually make a career out of coaching. I was like, I think I could actually use this and do this with the energy healing. And the moment that felt like I could do that, it was like I couldn't tolerate midwifery anymore.
Right.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. My analogy for anyone who's had babies and perhaps needed an epidural, if you were coping really well in labor, some women are, the plan is no epidural. They're coping really well. They're every contraction, they're riding it. And perhaps labor's getting really long. Maybe baby's in a funny position, whatever it is. At the moment where a decision is made to have an epidural, it's like they needed it 10 minutes ago. You go from coping beautifully to like, no, like get me out of here.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of what it felt like when I had made the decision to leave midwifery. It went from like, okay, I can do this to the end of the year to like, no, I need out now.
Okay.
So I jumped 2 feet into coaching and healing.
Wow.
Yeah. And it wasn't until the following year that I finally came to calling myself a witch. My one-on-one business coach at the time, I had mentioned that a fun masterclass had dropped into my mind, light witchcraft for the woo curious. And she was like, would you call yourself a witch? And I was like, I don't know, would I? Let's ask Instagram what they think. And Instagram was like, don't you already call yourself a witch? So I was like, I guess I'm a witch, I guess. I mean, the midwives were the original witches. It wasn't a huge step from where I already was.
Oh, interesting.
And that was last year I think it was May of last year that I landed on coming out of the broom closet.
Oh my gosh, adorable. I love it. Coming out of the broom closet. Okay. And did you feel some resistance in yourself? Like, did you have to do some healing around the word? Was it triggering? Anything like that?
It wasn't too bad. I don't know why specifically. I felt like I had enough examples of what witchcraft could be or meant to me, that it wasn't so scary. Like my coach was like, you don't have to, but I was like, no, it feels good. I'm just gonna do it. And it was interesting though, because my mom was like, could you use a different word?
I was going to ask next, how did your family take it? Yeah.
Yeah. No, my dad was just like, whatever. She's doing what she wants to do. They're both really supportive. They've both been entrepreneurs their whole lives. I never really recognized that until I was like midway through this journey and everyone's like, my family is like freaking out. I'm like, oh yeah, my dad owns he retired now and has sold it, but owned a flooring company. He had a construction company. My mom has always been an instructor. She teaches horseback riding and body use things. And so I was like, oh yeah, I come from entrepreneurs. So that part for them isn't scary.
Right. Yeah.
But definitely my mom was like, could you use a different word? Because for her, especially that generation, we're shifting what it means, but there's still that association with evil and, green and warty and long-nosed and all of those images that the church very purposefully started using in order to wrest power away from the people and take it for themselves and for the wealthy landowners in feudal Europe. So it's a really interesting history around the word witch and when it became something that was bad rather than simply meaning, wise woman, elder, all of those beautiful tender, earth keeper, all of those pieces, the hub, the older women of the communities who knew the healing ways and the plants and the medicines of the earth around them and the stories of the community, and knew how to help heal rifts and keep people in harmony without, or if they were there, the landowners, the church couldn't take control because the community kept looking to them as the wisdom, as the truth, as the place to go to seek counsel. And so they demonized them and they burned them.
I did not know that the sort of the narrative around witches started with the church. It seems obvious now that I'm saying it out loud. I'm like, duh, of course it started with the church. But yeah, thank you for that little piece of history, because, yesterday at work, so, I work a 9 to 5, and I don't share myself with the people I work with. They're all engineers and scientists, and but there is one, I got like 2 people who I let into my world, and so we were having a work Halloween party, and, people are dressing, and we got on the topic of witches, he and I, and he happens to know about me and whatever. And I was like, yeah, I'm interviewing someone to talk about being a witch, modern day witch. And he started like sharing his, like what he thinks a witch is. And I was like, what? And I like it, to me, in the bubble that I'm living in, I just kind of forgot that that's how people are perceiving witches. And I was like, no, it's just like, a spiritual woman, someone who like maybe uses holistic methods to address something. Not necessarily a woman either, it was just so simple to me. And how many of us are witches, just unidentified witches. But, his was like, it's really dark. They do evil things. You have to be afraid of them. And I was like, friggin' Disney, I swear, man.
Right? Yeah, Hollywood and the patriarchy and the church. it's that's what we've been told from a very early time. My favorite definition, I always come back to this because I feel like I can never say it quite as eloquently as she does. Carmen Spanyola she lives out on the island, and she's a witch. She has this beautiful book. It's called The Spirited Kitchen. It's a Wheel of the Year ritual and food cookbook. Really, really beautiful. But when I read her definition of witch, I was like, oh yeah, no, I'm a witch. That's obviously what I am. And she says, if resisting oppression, reclaiming my body as my own, praying to my ancestor tree, fighting for collective liberation, and organizing around a culture of care and dignity for all makes me a witch, my friend, I am that.
That's beautiful. Mm-hmm. Yeah. It feels very natural to me. Okay, so you shared quite a bit about like some of the general words you might use to describe a witch. What does, for you personally, like what helped you to identify as a witch, and what does it maybe look like in your day-to-day life?
Yeah, I think there's lots of little pieces, but the biggest one comes back to this cyclical way of moving with the world and being in more reciprocal relationship with the land and the planet and the more than human realm. Day to day, I think it comes out in the intentionality, the pieces of, noticing and being in connection with and reciprocity. And I would identify as a green witch or a hedge witch or something plant. I've been an environmentalist since I was like a little kid. I remember crying in grade 3 doing a project on the rainforest, being like, how can the adults be cutting down so much of the forest every day? Like, somebody stop them. And so I've had a really deep connection to the natural world since I was young. And that's really my through line, is kind of that ability to see the magic and the connection that exists everywhere. So I don't have a bunch of like, I don't do spells. I'm not a Wiccan for any listeners who are like, oh, she must practice Wicca. I'm not. It's an organized religion. And I'm not opposed to organized religion. I think it plays its part, but it's not for me. It feels too much like rules. I hate rules.
Aquarius.
I'm an Aquarius. Do not give me your rules. I will not abide by them. And so, I'll do ritual. I have an altar. I'm always like looking at my altar as I talk to people. It's right over there. I can see it. I hold ceremony for the 8 Wheel of the Year celebrations, which the Wiccans have adopted that pagan calendar, but it's a really ancient agricultural Celtic calendar. And so that made the kind of that plus my morning prayer is really, and then noticing magic and being open to it. It's so simple. It doesn't have to be complicated.
Yes. And it really is just lifestyle. Like, it's not necessarily specific, and it can be, I'm sure there are some ceremonies and rituals and things like that, but it can just be like just the way that you interact with
the world. Yeah, I think that's part of what called me to, you've taken my quiz, I think, my which are you quiz. Yeah. And that was just because it is like so many people, as you said, aren't even aware that they are practicing the essence of witchcraft, which is simply being a wise knowledge keeper and sharing healing, whether that be through food or through plants that you grow or, through connection to the lunar cycles. All of these different pieces can be witchcraft.
So let's talk about the types of witches, because I think listeners will love to just identify themselves. I know that we've got an audience full of witches for sure. So, what have you identified as some types of witches?
Yeah, if you go online and look, the lists are long. There's certainly, you can kind of decide what kind of witch you might want to be, but some of the more common ones are lunar witches, so witches who really work with the cycles of the moon. Maybe you hold a ritual for the full and new moon and mark those points. Really closely tied to that would be a sea witch, because obviously the tides are linked to the moon, and so I find a lot of overlap between those two. But witches who work the water, maybe you're the person who has like seashells. You can't go to the beach without collecting offerings from the sea, the connection to salt water and the call to be close to it. There are kitchen witches. So if your chicken soup is famous and amongst your family and friends as being absolutely healing, that's certainly indicative of kitchen witchery, or just the enjoyment of experimentation and using food for deep nourishment and not just to like feed hunger.
Right.
Yeah. And then green witch, hedge witch, those are kind of similar. Green witches tend to gardens and plants and growing things and have generally a lot of use for herbs and maybe have a lot of plants inside. I do. Eclectic witches are kind of a blend of practices. Maybe you pull from all sorts of traditions. And I think most of us have a little bit of eclecticism because, like, I'm not a lunar witch, but, like, I'll have a ceremony on the new moon sometimes.
Right.
If there's space for it. It's not my focus, but it's there. It's present. Yeah. Those are the ones that I cover in my quiz. Anyways.
Fun. Okay. We will link your quiz. Because you guys, I'm sure you guys, everybody loves a quiz. Quizzes are so fun.
They are fun. It pops up on my website when you go there, so it's easy.
Okay, great. Okay, fun. Yeah, I don't know. Like, I'm like listening. I'm like, I'm not sure which of those really describes me. I don't know. I feel like if there's one that's more, I suppose I'm like a big rock girl. So,
a crystal witch,
I mean,
or a divination witch. Yeah, and you do tarot, right?
Thing? Yeah,
a divination witch.
Divination. Okay, that feels good. Yeah.
Yeah. So like tarot and oracle and tasseography and pendulums and all of that kind of stuff. Yeah. There's no one, like, we can't fit us in boxes.
Right.
There's no box.
It's kind of going against the point, but we all love we all love seeing ourselves in some way. So it's fun to do that.
Yeah, for sure it is.
Okay, let's talk about Wheel of the Year. So you had mentioned it's an agricultural calendar. Celtic, did you say?
Yeah. The one that I follow is the Wheel of the Year, as it is kind of translated into modern day paganism, is based on the Celtic calendar. That being said, most cultures through time, if we look around the world, there's significant festival celebrations at these points of the year anyways, because it's agricultural. That's where we kind of stemmed from. So it's 8 celebrations, 4 of which are the equinoxes and the solstices. Okay. And those are called the cross-quarter days. And then 4 of which fall in between, roughly midway between those. And they're called the fire festivals. And they traditionally mark the beginning of the season. So in the Celtic calendar, we're about to have Samhain, Celtic pronunciations.
Oh my God, what did I call it? Samhain, she said.
Yeah, you and everybody else. Don't worry. The Spiritual Sisters actually did a really funny little reel on it last year, being like, how do we say this word? What is it? Huh?
And I probably saw that, and I really should have taken Samhain. Samhain, am I saying it right?
Samhain. Yeah, Samhain.
I want everyone to know it's the last time I say Samhain, okay? Samhain.
And full forgiveness. I listen to a lot of witchy books, like novels on Audible, and they say all of the words right except for Samhain. They all would say Samhain, and I'm like, it's Samhain. Anyways, that's the celebration that we're coming up to right away here, which is Halloween, and it is the beginning of the Celtic year. So we begin in the dark with the winter.
Oh.
Much like the Celtic cultures marked the beginning of the new day at sunset, which is such a fruitful, juicy, delicious way to look at the way time runs for us.
Yeah.
I talk a lot about rest and the courage to rest and permission to rest. And when I heard that the day begins at dusk, it just shifted everything about how I felt about rest, because it's like, we have to do that first. And so the year begins with the dark half of the year as we enter into winter, into Samhain. We have to rest first. We can't do anything unless we've done that.
Yeah. And you know what else it takes me to, and I'm sure it's taken you there, is like the womb space. You start in the darkness of, nothing, and then you birth from there. Anyway, that just came to mind while you're talking about that.
Yeah, we come from the dark. We begin in the dark in all the ways, and we will return to the dark. So it's a beautiful way of looking at the passage of time. The cyclicality of it too is really lovely. And so we move from Samhain to Yule, which is a familiar term for everybody. That falls on the winter solstice. And then from there we have Imbolc, which is in February 1st, which marks the beginning of spring in the Celtic calendar. It's still very much winter here, but we have too many months of winter, right? Yeah. I know. The folks on the island or over in Ireland, Scotland, it is spring. By then you're getting hints of snowdrops coming up through the snow. But from Imbolc we move to Ostara, which again will be familiar. Easter, Ostara. That's that spring equinox. And then we have Beltane or Beltana, depending on how you're going in for the pronunciations. And that one is May 1st. So May Day is the Christianized version of it.
Yep.
That and Samhain are the 2 most liminal times of the year. So when the veil is at its thinnest. And Beltane marks the entrance into the light half of the year and the returning of the light. And then Litha is midsummer, which is the summer solstice. And it begins to make sense that, midsummer, it sounds like the middle of summer. We always consider that to be the first day of summer. But in the Celtic calendar, Beltane marks the first day of summer. Litha, midsummer, is the middle of summer. And then we have Lunasa, which is a great mouthful of a spelling. Sounds simple. It's got lots of G's and H's and D's in it.
It sounds so pretty.
It is. It's beautiful. And there's lots of extra letters in there if you're looking at it written. And Lunasa is the first of the 3 harvest festivals. It's the beginning of autumn in the Celtic calendar. That's August 1st. And then we come around to Mabon, which is a modern name. That one was invented, the name for it was invented by the pagans, or the Wiccans rather, in the 70s. They took it from an old Welsh god, Mabon. The Celtic Wheel of the Year would simply call it autumn equinox, and that's September 21st. And it's the second of the 3 harvest festivals, and then we come back to Samhain, which is the final harvest and the beginning of the new year.
Oh my goodness. Just listening to that whole cycle, it was, when everything's just lighting up in your head as all these connections are being made, it's like you can see clearly. That's the experience I just had while you went through all that. So thank you. And I just feel very excited to have this knowledge and to work with it. And just so listeners know, Eileen runs ceremonies for each of these Wheel of the Year celebrations. And tonight is Samhain. I'm saying it right, Samhain.
You are? Yeah.
And she does them both online and in person. And I'm going in person tonight, and I'm so excited.
I'm so excited to have you.
Yeah, it feels, wow. I get to do the, marking the beginning of the year. That's just by chance. And it's... Thank you. Thank you for introducing me to this Wheel of the Year that I did not know. And like you said, all cultures around the world, we are all in some way marking these events because they're around our food cycle.
Yeah. Yeah. And because the church, so anywhere that practices has a Christian kind of heritage, the church took all of these and turn them into Christian festivals because they couldn't get the pagans to stop practicing their traditions. Right. So instead, they just kind of integrated them.
Right. To make them Christian.
Yeah. Right? Yeah. Okay. They're really good at that.
They really are. Yeah.
Yeah.
Plagiarizing and calling it their own. No. But, okay. Okay. Wow. So beautiful. And are they all, so the way you describe them, it seems like they're all equal timed, right?
Relatively equal, yeah. Because you've got those equinoxes and solstices, which all fall on the 21st of every 3 months, and then you've got the midway point. So it's not exactly halfway in between them, where the other ones fall. And it is likely that those fire festivals, the beginnings of the seasons, would have actually coincided closer with a moon than necessarily the exact midway point. Right. Because they weren't using the Gregorian calendar when this calendar was invented. But this year we actually have the Scorpio new moon on November 1st, which feels extra potent and juicy as we go. Yeah. Just amplifying all the energies of this time of year.
Excellent. Okay, so let's focus in on Samhain. Do you know a little history about the celebration and maybe how it turned into Halloween? I don't know if that's your wheelhouse, but if you do, I would love to know.
Yeah, I do know some. I should have brushed up on my facts, but I do know most enough to kind of draw some strings or similarities here. So the history of it, really, it was the time of year where the cattle would have been driven back down from the pastures. And they would have had a livestock slaughter going into winter. So they would keep some of their livestock, but a lot of it would be slaughtered because there would be no food for it over the winter. So it was a time of, feasting, celebration, and community, and also preparing for the long winter ahead. Most of the fire festival, or all of the festivals, they really like burning things on hilltops in Celtic culture. So the ancient myth around Samhain is to do with a magician's daughter, I believe. I can't remember her name, but Tlachta, that's how we say that. She went to mainland Europe to study with Magus, I believe is the name of the magician. Anyways, long story short, as things go in much of our history and mythology, she was raped while she was there. She returned to Ireland. She gave birth to triplets, and then she died on this hilltop. And she was the daughter of a druid, that's why, yes. And so to celebrate her, to mourn her, they had all of the fires all across Ireland were said to be put out. Everybody had to put out their fires, and then they built a massive fire on top of this Tlachta hill. It's still there. It's in County Meath, I believe, in Ireland. Anyways, they built a huge fire, and then every other fire in the country was to be lit with a burning brand from this fire. Oh. And so that's kind of like the real root history, Irish history anyways, linked with Samhain. There is all sorts of connection between the fact that this is a really liminal time of year, so that, again, the veil between the worlds is thinner. It's easier to access, for instance, our sacred dead. When, again, we see over in Mexico, Dios de los Muertos, and it's all kind of similar themes. But there were also, because the veil is thin, there's also the risk of less benevolent beings coming through. And so the practice of dressing up was actually so that you would hopefully be mistaken for one of the demons that might have gotten through, and so they'd pass you by because they thought you were one of them.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
Oh. Okay.
Yeah, same with the practice of carving pumpkins. So originally it was carved turnips, and they were placed on the doorstep. That one came, especially the term jack-o'-lantern came from some like really nasty dude who was doing some pretty unsavory things, and then he died in an unwell way. And to scare him away and make sure that he didn't come and play any tricks or haunt you, people started carving turnips in a face likeness and leaving them out on their doorsteps, and they were called jack-o'-lanterns. Oh, and when Irish immigrants came over to North America, they brought the practice with them, and it started to be pumpkins when they were over here, because pumpkins aren't native to that part of the world, to Ireland. I see. Yeah. So that's a fun one. Going mumming is a common practice in and around both Samhain and Yule, going door to door and singing, or doing something. So we get caroling from mumming, but around this time, around Samhain, it would be going door to door asking for cakes, and that's where the treats came from. Dressed up again to avoid the demons who were running around, asking for cakes. The tricks were more thought to be played by the fae, the fairy folk, who again more easily accessing our realm at that time of year. So that's some of the kind of fun histories of the how do we dress up and go trick or treating?
Yeah. And I was thinking yesterday, because it's pretty funny when you're standing in an office building and everyone's wearing Halloween costumes downtown, and you're like I know that they don't celebrate Halloween or Samhain all over the world. And so I'm like, imagine you just got here and walked into our office building. You'd be like,
what are you doing? Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting too, because in the UK and Ireland, there's not a lot of dressing up. I think North Americans really went hog wild with that one, or that side of it. Because over there, it is still a big deal. I remember being in Ireland shortly before Samhain a couple of years ago, and on the radio they were saying if you see the youth will pile up things to burn. They will steal wood, they will steal tires, they will whatever, they'll make these massive piles of them to have these bonfires on Samhain Eve. Cool. And on the radio, except that it's in the cities. And so on the radio, the cops were like, if you see one, please call it in, report it to us, but we are not going to remove it until the day of, because we want them to think that they're getting away with it. Right. So it's a problem because it's scouting. A fire hazard. Yeah. Mayhem. Anyways, the Celts love to burn things. Big fires.
Great. Okay, so then, as for all the witches listening and for anyone who's interested, what are some things that we might want to do around this particular festival celebration ceremony of Samhain.
So the theme of this time, the energies of this time are very much those of releasing the things that you don't need. I often think about it as like, cutting away the things that might fester over the long dark of winter. We want to remove anything or release anything that's not serving, that we don't want to be a part of our dreaming, perhaps. And also that sense of, if you have a garden, you have to cut things back and then let the leaves lie, let the plant matter lie around the base of the roots to provide insulation, but also compost for the next year. And so you're not throwing out the things you're releasing, you're simply letting them go, letting them turn into fertile compost over these long, dark months. So that is a big piece of it, right? Letting go, releasing, clearing space for the dream time that is coming. Another really beautiful practice is to have an ancestor supper or work with your ancestors in some way because the veil is thin. A really cool thing to do is to write letters to your dearly beloved, and maybe it's to somebody that you knew in this physical life, or maybe it's an ancestor a few generations removed that you know stories of. But writing for their guidance, to tell them about life, to connect with them. If you have a fireplace, setting them a seat right beside the hearth, because that would be the warmest, the most coveted seat in the house. Yeah, all those little practices. Another one that can be fun is having an ancestor supper. So we're doing a little bit of that tonight. Cooking foods from your ancestry, or even just, having an intentional meal where you invite the ancestors in to dine with you and setting them a place at the table.
Right, yeah. And I guess you could share memories or things like that, storytelling around that. Exactly. I imagine that could be a good way to connect.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. And are there any particular foods to work with, given that it's, entering?
We think about harvest season, right? So anything seasonal, pumpkins, gourds, all of those kinds of things. Meats, again, because there would have been that large slaughter, that meat would have been readily on hand, some of it being processed, but a lot of it being eaten, again, to get kind of bulk up before the cold and the hungry months of the year. I'm making shepherd's pie for tonight because that feels
spoiler alert.
Really, spoiler, that kind of really rich, hearty root vegetables and meats and stews and things like that.
Amazing. This is so beautiful. I'm so grateful to have been introduced to all of this. And I find ceremony and ritual around things like just something I'm naturally drawn to. And generally I'll do it around moons or just things that are happening in my life. Whatever I feel needs ritual. Maybe it's an ending of something or stepping into something new. And I feel just really excited to have these set points in the year to look towards, to have that ceremony.
Yeah, it's been kind of the foundation for me. It's the first thing I started to do when I was embarking on this path. I was still working full-time as a midwife, and I remember holding my first ceremony 2 and a bit years ago now, and just feeling so like, I'm not ready, I don't know what I'm doing. And it was only online at that point. And I've often said, there's been a few times where I'm like, is it the thing I want to keep doing or offering? And then for me, it's something that I want to do regardless whether people are coming, regardless whether it's part of my business. It's something that I want to do and continue to hold myself to. And so it feels really beautiful and supportive.
Oh, great. Thank you. Thank you for doing it.
My pleasure.
Okay, there's one more thing I want to touch on before we wrap up today. As I went through your content and your messaging and, what you're about and what your story's about, I saw a lot around slowing down and rest and all that sorts of thing. And I was like, oh, this isn't a this is not a coincidence that I'm, finding you and connecting with you, as I definitely live I currently live a hustle, burnout kind of lifestyle, but I got a plan in place that's taking me away from it. So I'm like, oh, interesting at this season of my life, like to meet you. So I would love to know maybe just a bit about your story, or like your motivation to want to help others with slowing down, and then like how slowing down has changed your life or the lives of your clients.
Yeah. It's so interesting, again, like when we start embarking on these pathways, seeing what comes up, and this piece just kept bubbling up, even when I was like, witchcraft, but rest, but, coaching around relationship stuff, but rest, but it just kept coming back over and over. And even the sense of deepening into connection with the earth doesn't go in perpetual spring, summer, spring, summer, spring, summer. And yet that's what our whole society has told us we need to be doing at all times. This like linear upward, produce more, faster. And I kept coming back to like, we are human beings, not human doings, that old cliche. We are missing out on life by always hurrying and pushing through to the next milestone, or feeling like we need to prove ourselves worthy in order to be able to take care of ourselves and rest. Especially as women, that worthiness comes up over and over. We've been really socialized to believe that a good woman takes care of other people at the expense of herself. We hold those women up, right? As they're so self-sacrificing and selfless, and they're so nice, and what a saint, right? Yep. When in reality, we need to be upholding the women who have firm boundaries, who say no, who have the ability to slow down and simply be, and step out of so much of what capitalism tells us is to like consume more, you'll feel better, produce more, you'll be worthy. And it's killing us. It's killing us. It's killing the planet. And so that has been really important for me. If any of your listeners are familiar with human design, I am a 6/3 projector. And so part of my story is to experiencing it and then share. And so I very much ran up, as I kind of described, against a wall of burnout in midwifery, and recognizing how much of my life I had been living for other people. It happened I was married at one point as well, and really, really deeply unhappy. And it was actually just about a month ago that I was like, oh, holy shit, I didn't feel worthy of leaving. I felt like his happiness was more important than mine. If I'd said that to me, I would have been like, no, I don't think that. But clear, I did by my actions. That's what was playing. So there's that kind of piece of my story. I burnt out again this summer. And in August, I was like, I'm dysfunctional. I can't function. I can't do. I'm done. And so it's like this relearning, remembering. I feel like I have to continue to kind of experience what it is that I'm here to pass on and to teach and to help women reclaim that power and connection to body, to intuition, to that deep wisdom that lives inside of us. And part of that is to their worth, so that they can start to actually create time for themselves.
And do you find like, and it might just be my fishbowl, but do you find like I'm seeing it for everyone, but I'm seeing it for women a lot. Is there any particular reason you think women are just like burning out more?
I think I know that levels of burnout have historically always been higher among women, and then that COVID came along and really exacerbated that. And it comes back, I think, to this conditioning where we are holding ourselves to such a ridiculous standard of, being a boss babe and also taking care of the home. And also, we still do way more unpaid labor than the men in our life. We're partnered with men. If we live with men, we still do way more unpaid labor than they do, even in those relationships where it's more equitable. It's just such a long ingrained history habit, programming for all of us. It's unaware for most of us or many of us. And so I think that's a big part of it. And then COVID came along and we look at those stats and, people suddenly couldn't go to work. They were working from home, but the kids were also home. And guess who had to take care of the kids? It was the women.
Work. Yeah.
And work. Yeah. Like across the board, women did more and lost more work hours than the men.
It's such important work that you're doing. And like, it's something I run up against. I mean, just like you shared, you run up against it too. It's one of the, it's a program that's like keep coming out. And, it's also the world we're living in. So it's really like, okay, you try to heal your way out of that, but then you're living in the matrix.
Yes.
So, what have you found the benefits to be in yourself and in your clients of like working through this programming?
I think I know that the biggest piece is finding joy in life again. I'm thinking of one client specifically who just wrapped up 6 months with me, and she came to me and she was at her wit's end. She was like, I was depressed, I was anxious, I was so overwhelmed. I remember our first call, I was like, how can I best support you? She was like, I don't even know, like I just need help. And by the end of our time together, watching her shift and find space and magic and joy and like excitement to wake up again and out of this rigid like, well, I can't because XYZ. Often like there's a lot of responsibility on her shoulders at home, stay-at-home mom of 2 boys, but also an entrepreneur, and feeling like there wasn't an alternative, and then slowly recognizing where and how she could ask for support, that she was worthy of doing so. Do a lot of journey work and some inner child healing that can be really transformative for folks. And the recognition at the end that she defined it as at least an hour and a half a day for herself, where before she wouldn't have even thought that was possible. And it doesn't sound like a lot. And when you're like drowning and don't feel like you have a 5 minutes to yourself, an hour and a half's a lot of time. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. And I mean, you said everything when you said finding joy in life. The end. Like,
right? Be excited to wake up again.
Yeah. Like, what more do we need to say?
Right?
That's everything.
Yeah. We often think that everything needs to change. We're all, for us to be happy, we need to get to some milestone or goal, or when the kids are older, or when. And the reality is, unless we create the change now in the exact place that we are, we're never going to arrive.
Preach. Yes. It's all about like it's the internal environment. The external will just shift.
Yeah.
Your job is the internal.
Yeah. I often say, you don't have to change everything, but you will be changed.
Yeah. Oh, that's nice. Wow. That was a very beautiful, rich conversation. Thank you so much. I learned a lot.
You're welcome.
And I think you're doing really important things with folks, because I mean, like, I can't list for you the amount of people I know suffering from the burnout programming and the hustle programming. So I would love to know, can you share with the listeners the ways that they can work with you?
Yes. So I've kind of alluded to it. My primary, my one-on-one container is a 6-month container.
Okay.
one of the things that I really found when I was doing some of this work and learning and growing and healing was that so many programs feel like a fire hose of information and like calls and all of these. So I really wanted to create a space that was spacious and allowed time for integration. Right. So I work, in one-on-one calls, but also with WhatsApp support. And I do remote energy healings where people receive healing while they go about their day.
Nice.
And that, of course, includes everything else that I'm doing. So we've talked about the ceremonies. Those are open to anybody who wants to join. They are hybrid, so you can come online, you can come in person. No matter where you are in the world, you can hop into those. And I've had people from Amsterdam and I've had people from Florida. And so it's interesting to see where folks trickle in from. And then I've recently started to offer in-person retreats. So I saw that. Yeah. We had a rest retreat back in September. I'm co-hosting with another magical being, and we're holding a sacred rage and replenishment retreat in November that we're really excited about. So that's really exciting. And there's an early bird price on until October 31st.
Perfect. Well, we got a lot of Calgarians in the audience, so that's perfect.
Right.
Wow, amazing. Okay, and I wanted to add for anyone who's listening who's like, wow, 6 months. I worked with a coach for 6 months early on before all my gifts came in, and it was such a transformational time. And as you describe, when you extend something for 6 months, it takes the pressure off of there's a lot of pressure in short programs, and that's like the opposite of what you're about, clearly. You're trying to talk about slowing down and trust and flow and ease. And those 6 months changed my life. Shout out to Dixie Bennett. She's also in Calgary, and she's a coach, a spiritual coach. And I think that length of coaching programs is one of the most powerful.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I found actually at the 3-month mark that the last 2 people who came through and wrapped up with me were like, I'm so glad this is 6 months, because if I was ending right now, neuroscience comes on board. It takes a long time to create new neural pathways and overcome the habits. Your brain wants to default to the habitual patterns because it takes fewer calories and therefore is a survival mechanism. And if we get down to the basic science of it. And so to help with that gentle shifting and then practicing and holding of accountability and stuff, I really find that 6 months means that you walk away with lasting change instead of rebounding right back to where you were.
Right? Yeah. Yes. Yeah. And then there's also life, we can't expect, transformation is not if you do this for 8 weeks, life will change. Life has its own timing, and it's nice to have support and have someone around for those things that are shifting. Things actually shift in 6 months, whereas anyway, I could go on and on. Okay. Thank you, Eileen. And thank you everyone for joining. Happy Samhain. Do we say that? Happy Samhain?
Yeah, blessed Samhain, happy Samhain, whatever.
Blessed Samhain, everyone. And I hope you have some rituals that you can now work with for this week's celebration. Okay, until next time, thank you. Thanks, Eileen.
Thank you.